After completing part 1, you will be able to understand the need for labor groups, know how IP restrictions can be set up, and set up time card permissions for several scenarios. Let's log into iSolved and take a look at these options together. We are going to start by looking at our labor groups. Labor groups can be found under Client Management, Time Management, and towards the bottom of that menu item, Labor Groups. The labor group area is used to define and control the labor values users could potentially use on their time card, iSolved mobile app, and supported time clock hardware. An example of this may be if your company would like employees to clock in and out of a department each day, labor groups can be used via employee self-service, iSolved Go, and those physical time clocks. Now, as we look at the screen, you'll notice that there's 2 different tabs. Let's get started with the General tab. We're going to choose Add New on our action bar, and the first thing the system wants us to do is enter in a name for this labor group. Now, you can use this as hourly labor group or salary labor group, or you could simply say this is department location. I'm going to do location/department. Now, if I want to be more descriptive, just beneath it I can enter a detailed description and also choose a display sequence. The display sequence comes in handy if you have multiple labor groups being assigned to a certain type of employee. So if they're choosing department and then job separately, we would create 2 different labor groups. We would need to enter a display sequence to tell the system which one would apply first. Since I'm only creating 1 labor group for now, I'm going to make my display sequence 1. Now, just beneath that display sequence, you'll notice we have 2 boxes. 1 for available labor fields, 1 for assigned labor fields. At this point, you get to determine, out of the labor fields that you have created, which one are you wanting to apply to the group? For my example, I'm going to move location over and department over, because I want my employees to clock in and out of both. I want them to have a location and a department associated with their punches. Now over here on the right-hand side, you can come in and order the way that you want them to appear. So we could do location at the bottom and department up top, or location at the top, department at the bottom. Now I'm going to choose Save Up here at the top, and you'll notice on the left-hand side, our group has been created. Let's move on to the Items tab at the top of the screen. I mentioned that the Items tab could be used for the physical time clock, but it's also used for our mobile application. Let's go back to our example that the employee might be clocking into a location and a department. This Items tab allows you to combine the 2 so that the employees are not having to make 2 selections. So let's create a combination and show you how this works. I'm going to hit Add New on our action bar, and the first thing the system is asking us for is a number, then a description, then a location, and a department. Now I'm going to choose the location and the department first, just so it makes sense how I'm numbering or describing this item. So you'll notice from my location dropdown, I have my corporate office, my North Carolina location, and my Salt Lake City location. So I'm going to pretend that I'm building my Salt Lake City items, and then you'll notice from my department dropdown, I have quite a few different options. So I'm going to say I'm creating Salt Lake City accounting. So now that we have the idea as far as the location and the department, let's jump back to the number and description. You can make the number whatever you would like it to be. Just keep in mind that this is the number that the employee will see at the mobile app or will be punching at the physical time clock. So I'm going to do 1011, just because I'm picking a random number. My department number happens to be 101. I'm just adding in 1 to the end of it. Maybe we know our Salt Lake City location is our first location. In my description, I'm going to call this SLC accounting. So you can see I'm combining the naming convention of both our location and department. When I hit Save Up here at the top, you'll notice that we've created this combination. So if an employee clocks in to 1011, their time will be tied to the Salt Lake location and the accounting department. Now this Items tab is also used for the mobile application like I mentioned. if the employees will be clocking in and out of any labor values via the mobile application, you need to create an item for each of them. So if I choose Add New, maybe it's just a location. We need to add in a number and a description for every selection that the employee might choose. Now, that kind of sounds time-consuming, but the great thing is we offer an import to be able to import these items in the event that you have quite a few that need to be created. Now that we've reviewed the labor groups, IP address restrictions are the next area that we're going to set up and talk about. We are going to navigate to Client Management, Client Utilities, and IP address restrictions. IP address restrictions were released to allow service bureaus and clients the ability to create an additional layer of security within the software. Now, most clients would like their employees to be able to check their pay stubs, request time off from home, but do not want them to have the ability to clock in or clock out. With our IP address restrictions, we can set 2 layers of security. We can set restrictions on where they can check their check stubs and submit time off requests, and also where they can clock in and clock out. With the IP address restrictions, we can enter a single IP address or a range of IP addresses and consider those approved. Now, approved means as long as they're within that address, they can log in, and then we can determine if we want them to clock in or clock out from that area as well. So I'm going to pull iSolve back up, and let's take a look at the different options within the IP address restrictions. You'll notice that on the left-hand side there are 3 roles that we could give them access to. No IP address restrictions, restrict login to only approved IP addresses, and bypass 2-factor authentication. Now, as iSolve sits today with no IP address restrictions turned on, it is our very first option. This means that users can access iSolve from anywhere, whether that be home, their cell phone, the work office, but they're required to enter 2-factor authentication. They need to enter in their email address and password, as well as enter in their authorization code if they're logging in from a new IP address. And new means that they haven't logged in from this address within the last 30 days. Now, the second one, restrict login to only approved IP addresses. This means that users will only be able to log in from an approved IP address. 2-factor authentication is not required. So if I enter the IP address from my office, anyone within that IP address range of the office does not need the authentication code. They just have to enter in their username and their password. Now the last one, the bypass 2-factor authentication, this is similar to the no restriction, but it will require authentication if the employee has not logged in from the IP address in the last 30 days. Now you'll notice up at the top we have the ability to set this access for employees, managers, supervisors, and also your client level access. So you guys can determine if clients should be accessing this information from home as well. Now if we're setting IP address restrictions up in the client utility section, we're setting up where they can access iSolved as a whole. Where can they check their check stubs, look at their time cards, submit time off requests. Down here at the bottom is where we can set those actual IP addresses. So I'm going to choose Edit up here at the top, and you'll notice down at the bottom, we click the Add New button, and we can enter in a description and a beginning and ending IP address. So let's go ahead and enter in, we're going to say, for example, the warehouse, and then we can type in the IP address for that warehouse location. Now, as we enter IP addresses into the system, keep in mind it has to be a public IP address and not a private IP address. And when we're entering this, the IP addresses are verified to ensure that the formatting is correct, but iSolved can't verify that it's a valid IP address. That's up to you guys. So I'm going to type in my IP address, and you'll notice at the end we can type in an ending IP address. If we wanted to do a range of addresses, maybe we wanted to do 201 to 220, any IP addresses so that fell between the 201 and the 220 would be considered approved. So up here at the top, if I choose Save, as I have the screen right now, there is no IP address restrictions for just accessing the system, But we did create some approved IP addresses where in our next section, we can choose where they can clock in or clock out. Now, you can have multiple IP addresses, approved IP addresses down here at the bottom. Some companies have, sporadic IP addresses. They don't really have a range. People are located all over, so they've all got their own IP addresses. You simply hit the Add New, enter in the description and the IP addresses for as many as you would like to have listed. So, IP address restrictions under Client Utilities is where we can designate where employees can actually log into the system. We also get to designate our list of approved IP addresses for our time card permissions. So we're going to move on to our time card permissions next. Now, time card permissions can be found under Client Management, Time Management, and Time Card Permissions. So I'm just going to scroll up just a little bit, and I'm going to do my time card permission rules. Now, the layout of the screen, pretty similar to the other ones. You've got the rule names along the left-hand side, and then we get to set the security on the right-hand side. So up here at the top, let's kind of walk through the layout. If I choose Add New on our action bar, the first thing the system wants us to do is create a name for this security role. Beneath it, we have the configuration options for our employees, our supervisors, and our managers. We have some self-service punch options that we can select from. Our mobile permissions, our allowed IP addresses, and then down at the bottom, our labor group permissions. So let's kind of walk through all of these. The first scenario that I'm going to walk you through is if we want to give our employees the ability to clock in and clock out via self-service or the mobile app, and then give supervisors rights to edit that time. So up here at the top, I'm going to call this one standard, because I feel like, and this is just my scenario, I feel like employees clocking in and out and managers and supervisors editing the time is the most standard time card permissions that I see. Now, if you want to make the name more descriptive, EE clock in and out, manager supervisor edits, that's perfectly fine. So let's go through the options in our configuration. Hour time. You'll notice from the employee dropdown, there's 3 options here: read only, allocate only, or edit. So are we wanting employees to have the ability to enter hours onto their time card? Physically say, I worked 8 hours. The 3 options, read only means no, they don't have the ability to enter hours. Allocate only would be for clients that do, job tracking. They want the employees to clock in and clock out, but maybe at the end of the week, they go in and allocate those hours to specific jobs or labor values. That's our allocate only option. Edit is if we want to give them rights to go in and enter the hours onto their time card at any time. So I'm going to leave that one at read only. Hours notes. When hours are added onto an employee's time card, you have the ability to add notes if you'd like to. Now, if the employees have the ability to enter hours, I would probably require or at least give them permissions to edit and add notes to those. Notes, I think, are just a great way to keep track of why adjustments are being made, why they're manually adding things to the time card. So we have hide, where they don't see them, edit, they have the ability to add them, or required, they have to add them in order to move on. Punch time. Do you want the employees to be able to physically add punches to the time card? Now, I don't mean clock in and clock out. I mean, when they come in, they can enter in that I got here at 8:42 a.m. or I got here at 10:05 p.m. They're physically having the ability to enter the time onto their time card. You'll notice we have that read only and edit option. We also have notes for the punches. Same idea. If they have rights to add punches on their time card, do you want to hide those notes, give them the ability to add notes, or do we want to require notes? Adjustments. Do we want employees to be able to add time card adjustments onto their time card? We can hide it, read only, or give them edit access. Remember, adjustments are for things like mileage. We talked about that in our time card adjustments section. Now, most companies have the employee submit the mileage to the supervisor, and the supervisor or manager can add that in, but this is where you can designate if the employee should have that level of access. check preview. In our next section, we're going to talk about being able to do a check preview on the time card. So you can give the employees the ability to go in and preview their check at any time. Now, some clients don't love this option because employees may run it and then you process payroll and something looks different. Maybe you made an adjustment after they had ran this check preview report. Check preview gives the employees the ability to preview their check right from their time card. So rather than having to run a report or wait until payroll is done, they can preview it, the first day of the pay period or even the last day of the pay period. So there's two options, not available or available. Now we have those exact same options for the supervisor and the manager. My suggestion to you is determine who or if both of them are going to be making edits to the time cards, and if so, we're going to change the access from read only to edit. So I'm going to do edit for the hours, and then I'm going to make edit on the notes. I'm not going to require that they put notes in, but I'm going to give them the option to put notes in. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the punch time and the punch notes. So they can enter punches, and they can also add notes to those punches if they'd like to. Now in my scenario for that mileage adjustment, I'm going to give my supervisor and manager the rights to add those into the system. And then I don't want anybody previewing the check in my example. Now beneath this, you'll notice we have an allow self-service punch option. If you would like to give your employees the rights to clock in and clock out through the computer, then you would check the allow self-service punch. You'll notice it also gives you the ability to say, should the employees be entering notes? Do we want to require that they put notes in every time they clock in and out, or do we want to hide the notes? Now I'm going to put edit because I like the employees to have options. I like them to be able to add notes if they need to, but not require them. So allow self-service punch is what turns on the ability to clock in and clock out via the computer. Now beneath that we have mobile permissions. Mobile permissions are for the iSolved Go, the mobile application. So if these checkboxes are not selected, the user will not be able to clock in or clock out through the application itself. So we have to check the allow mobile detail punch or allow quick punch if we want to give them those types of access. Now beneath that we have allow mobile quantity. If you're utilizing quantity within the system, you could select this. And then our mobile meal lockout and mobile break lockout. These features have not yet been added into the iSolved Time system. So the checkboxes are here, but they don't trigger anything just yet. On the right-hand side, we have that allowed IP addresses. So just a few moments ago, we talked about the IP address restriction. Remember, on the client level, you're restricting where they can access iSolved from. Here in our time card permissions, you'll notice I'm getting a list of IP addresses. Well, and mine's just the warehouse. That's the only one we created. But this is where we can determine where can people clock in or clock out. So if we're doing it on the client level, it's where can they access iSolved. In the time card permissions, it's where can they clock in or clock out. So if I select this restrict IP address and only check the warehouse, I think my IP address was 168.100.15.201. Anybody who tries to clock in or clock out from another IP address, so something besides that IP address we selected, they would get an error. They would not be able to clock in or clock out. So if you do not want to have IP address restrictions for clocking in or clocking out, leave this unchecked. If you would like to block it, you'll select the restrict IP addresses and then choose the allowed IP addresses or where they can clock in and clock out from. Now at the very bottom of the screen, we have our labor group permissions. Remember, the labor groups are where we get to determine that employees can clock in and clock out of those departments or locations, whatever we had deemed our labor values. So if we want them to be able to choose those options, down here at the bottom, you'll notice that there is an allow checkbox, and we can choose to turn the permission on for employee, supervisor, manager, or self-service. Now, if we look at the employee one, this is if the employee has rights to enter hours or enter punches onto their time card Do we want them to be able to add the labor values? Now, there's two options. We can allow them to edit, which means they can add it if they want to, but it's not required. Or we can require that it has to be on all punches or all hours. The required option comes into great handy for people like construction or government workers. Most of their time has to be tied to a job to be considered billable. So clients require that they enter jobs or locations, departments onto every punch or every hour record. The supervisor and manager features, or these areas, are here if we want to give the supervisors or managers rights to enter those labor groups on their employees' punches or hours. Once again, we can give them the ability to edit or we can require it. The self-service option that's listed here is for the employees that are clocking in and clocking out via the computer. So via self-service, do we want them to be able to add the labor values or require the labor values? So I just want to distinguish the two one more time. Self-service is when employees are clocking in and clocking out. The employee section is if they have the ability to physically add hours or punches onto the time card. Now, if you remember, we created some items on our labor groups tab. If you're only wanting to give them selected options, so you don't want them to be able to freely choose from your list of all locations or all departments, you can come to the labor value selection and click the select values, and you'll notice it gives us a list of the items that we had created. So you can choose, I only want this group to see the 5 location department combinations. So you simply check the checkbox and hit save. Otherwise, you can leave this one unchecked and they would be able to select from all locations and all departments. So I'm going to choose the edit on self-service and then the edit on punch and hours for my manager and supervisor. And up here at the top, I'm going to choose save. Now that was just my standard rules. I'd like to show you another creation where we're giving the employees rights to edit their time cards. This one, I've seen a lot of attorneys or law offices give their employees the rights to just enter their time on their time card. They trust them, they don't want them to physically clock in and clock out, but at the end of the week, they go in and add their time into the system. So we're going to choose Add New up here at the top in our time card permissions, and I'm going to call this EE Edit. So employees have the rights to edit. Again, the layout is the exact same. The only difference is I'm going to change my abilities to enter time from read only to edit. So they can enter hours and add notes if they'd like to. They can enter their punches and add notes if they'd like to. And I want my employees to be able to enter any mileage adjustments if necessary. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the managers and supervisors. In case the employee does something incorrect, they can go in and fix it. So I'm going to change these ones to edit. Once again, just repeating the same thing for my manager. Now down here at the bottom, we can allow self-service punch. In my scenario, I said I didn't want the employees clocking in and clocking out, so I'm not going to check it. But if you want to give them either or, they can enter time or they can clock in and clock out, you would simply select the Allow Self-Service Punch and then choose if you wanted them to be able to add notes or not. If we wanted them to utilize the mobile application, remember we would select the Allow Mobile Detail Punch or Allow Mobile Quick Punch. The difference between the two, the detailed punch allows them to choose, are they clocking in, are they clocking out, is it a lunch punch, a break punch, and add labor values. Quick punch is simply they click a button and it takes the time and records it, so they don't have options. Do we want to have IP address restrictions, and do we want labor group options? Now in my labor group options, I'm going to choose the edit on hours and edit on punch for all of these. Because the employee has rights to physically enter time onto their time card, I want to give them the ability to enter that labor values to it. Up here at the top, I'm going to choose Save, and we now have 2 sets of time card permissions available.